Parade the colors. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Hand salute. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Post the colors. Ready, two.
Yeah, please be seated. Jim Petosa, who is the president of the congregation, is supposed to welcome you, but unfortunately they had a medical problem in his family, and so I'm substituting for him. So I'm Bill Westland, and so I'm welcoming you all, and this is the 255th birthday celebration of John Quincy Adams. And also, this is the 55th anniversary of this wreath-laying ceremony, which goes back, incidentally, to Lyndon Johnson when he was president. And President Johnson, by presidential order, said that on the birthday of every ex-president, there would be a wreath laid at the graveside in the name of the current president. And so this is, I said, the 55th time we have done this for John Quincy Adams. And also, President Biden will be the 11th president that actually, I have to say, ordered this ceremony. And with the Adamses, the Navy always represents the presidents, both John Adams and John Quincy Adams, because John Adams was president when the Navy was officially formed. John Quincy Adams, from the time he was Secretary of State and his Monroe Doctrine, knew the importance of the Navy. And on top of that, Charles Francis Adams III was Secretary of the Navy during the Hoover administration. And also, I suppose we'd have to say, presidents really fit in here, because President Kennedy, President Johnson, President Nixon, President Carter, President H.W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, all served in the United States Navy. So therefore, there is that connection. And every year, we try to come up with some sort of theme for this celebration, and sort of in this time that we're living in now, and all sorts of talk about maybe we're in danger of losing our democracy. And so we thought it might be a good theme of John Quincy Adams and democracy, and really, I suppose we'd have to say, democratic government. And so hopefully, we'll be able to carry out this theme, and we'll all learn something from it. And without going any further, let me introduce our first speaker. And our first speaker will be Mayor Cope, Mayor of Quincy, who's representing the city. And I think, Mayor, this is the seventh. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that we have a benediction. Let me. Minister, the Reverend Froome will actually do the benediction. Sorry about that, Rebecca.
Let's take a deep breath together. Well, you can stay seated. That was for the breath. Take a deep breath together, feeling that spirit of life and love that moves within, between, and beyond us all. Heart to heart, screen to screen, generation to generation. Let us lift our hearts in a spirit of prayer and invocation. Spirit of life, God, whose other names are love, are justice, that we know by many names and in many ways. We gather today as a community, the community of Quincy, community of Massachusetts, community of America. We gather coming from many different walks of life, carrying many different experiences with us, drawn to this stone temple to remember and honor the life and the legacy of President John Quincy Adams. In our time together, may we be blessed with open ears and open hearts as we listen to the ways in which this man's life and legacy is present today. As we listen together, we do not seek to minimize the differences in our society. We do not seek to ignore the inequities in our society, but rather to remember the promise that has always been part of this country, so that with thoughtful, critical, compassionate listening to history, we might gain the skill, build the relationships, cultivate the presence of mind and heart to bring that promise more fully into our lives, our city, our country. May this moment ground us in that promise so that we might guide one another into the fulfillment of that promise. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.
Lieutenant Commander, members from our Naval Operations Center in Quincy, our veterans, thank you for your service. Senator Keenan, Dr. Fitzgerald, Superintendent Peake, Mr. Adams. I see Representative Ayers is with us as well, and I see Mr. Edwards, the President of the Historical Society, is with us. And I did want to give a shout out to Mr. Anthony Moore, who has given a lot of time over the years at Mass Historic, actually transcribing a number of John Quincy Adams's diaries and letters, particularly in his latest years. It was tough penmanship to read. Anthony, thank you for your service as a candidate for auditor. Certainly a pleasure and honor for me to bring the greetings of the city here this morning to this annual event. It's actually a beautiful day in July. It's usually a little warmer in here. I recently read the book, William Cooper on the Lost Founding Father, which was a great read on John Quincy Adams, and I'd suggest if you have not seen that one, I think you'd enjoy it. It's my most favorite of all. In that book, it speaks about a number of things with John Quincy Adams and really talks about his joyous years serving in the Congress, Mr. Eloquent, as he was known on the floor of Congress. It speaks of his funeral was only going to be surpassed by Abraham Lincoln. His funeral was an incredible outcry all across the country. The train ride, he laid in state in Philadelphia, laid in state in New York, before coming home here to his final resting place. And one of his political foes at the time said, Mr. Adams did not belong to a political party. Mr. Adams belonged to the American people. And I think that's a great lesson for us today. We speak about democracy, and certainly this, to sustain our republic. I think the Adams stories is one of responsibility of citizenship and what comes with being a citizen of this great nation. So let his story and the entire Adams family story continue to be an inspiration to future generations. So happy birthday to John Quincy Adams. And now I ask Mr. Reid Adams to come up.
Good afternoon. My name is Reid Boylston Adams, and on behalf of the Adams family, I'd like to thank the United States Navy, Reverend Froome, and the Church of the Presidents for having us here, and for all of the work that's been involved this year and every year in putting together this ceremony. As a child, I can remember coming to events just like this, where my father would speak, and sometimes where his father would speak. And while they had other jobs, they were historians by passion, and I'm sure if they were here today, they would give you some great fact. Maybe Mary Ann can give one too later, that only they would know. Unfortunately for all of you, I am not a historian and I do not have that talent. I am, however, a veteran of the United States Navy, and I inherited their sense of patriotism. So my grandfather served in World War II, my father served in Vietnam, and I served in support of Operation Enduring Freedom when the Twin Towers fell in Manhattan. At the time, I was the communications officer on a guided missile destroyer. I remember feeling both empowered by where I was located, because I was directly involved in the immediate response to the horrific attack that day. And I also remember feeling completely unhelpful as I lay safely behind untold weaponry almost 8,000 miles away from the thousands of victims in the attack that day. After 9/11, I distinctly remember the world shifting in front of my eyes. When we deployed before 9/11, life on the ship was challenging, but that did not compare to a visit to Stonehenge, a bullfight in Spain, or a 3-mile run on the rock race to the top of Gibraltar. In contrast, after 9/11, I remember general quarters, routine underway refuelings, port and starboard watch rotations, as all of these servicemen probably are familiar with, and many grueling months at sea. But I also remember returning to the United States and discovering a true sense of purpose. Our response as a country to 9/11 was far from perfect, but there was authentic patriotism in the country that was not driven by politics or campaign slogans. Fast forward 21 years, and much of that purpose has faded, and this is not terribly surprising. After all, this year's college seniors were not alive during 9/11. So what does this all have to do with JQA? When he became the 6th president, the country was struggling to find common ground just 36 years after the effective date of the U.S. Constitution. He had just lost both the popular vote and yet won the election, which meant the country was incredibly divided, with 2 major political parties that were doing their best to outduel and outmaneuver one another. The upcoming election of 1828 has been referred to as the dirtiest presidential campaign in history. Against that backdrop, in his inaugural address, JQA chose to focus on the positive and to find common ground. He openly addressed the two main political parties, noting they divided the opinions and feelings of the country. But what he said next in his speech was telling, because he went on to say, "The candid and the just must now admit that both have contributed splendid talents, spotless integrity, ardent patriotism, and disinterested sacrifices to the formation and administration of this government." In other words, after a bitter fight for the White House, and while a bitter fight was already brewing for the next election, he chose to focus on the contributions of all involved, and he sought to find a common purpose. Then, leading up to the election of 1828, undoubtedly to his political detriment, he refused to engage in politicking. As Barack Obama recently said, if we want democracy to flourish, we will have to fight for it, we will have to nurture it, and we will have to demonstrate its value again and again in improving the lives of ordinary people. And this is what I believe JQA was doing, and what we can hope current and future presidents will continue to do. There are obviously many ways to be impressed by John Quincy Adams. He's still known as perhaps the most intelligent president we've ever had. His career in public services spanned 6 decades, and he worked to champion causes he believed in, like the end of slavery, until suffering a fatal stroke on the House floor at the age of 80. He's also the reason we are all here today, 225 years after his birth. But for my children, who are sitting right there, and for the rest of the Adams family, I'd like to highlight JQA's vision and moral compass, even if it contributed to his political troubles. Focus on the positive, move this great nation forward, and make this country worthy of his service and the service of all those in our armed forces. Thank you for your time, and happy birthday to JQA.
Now, next, let me introduce Superintendent Mary Ann Peak of the Adams National Historical Park.
Thank you, Bill. Before I begin, I would like to share with you that a year ago, Kelly Cobble, National Park Service Curator, represented me here, and she represented the National Park Service. She was responsible for the artifacts that the Adamses left as part of their legacy, some 90,000 objects, but she was also responsible for telling the story that related to them and their history. In addition, she was president of the Quincy Art Association, and she was a member of this community. This program meant everything to her. Having the opportunity to go before you and celebrate with you on behalf of John Quincy Adams a year ago was the highlight of her career. This was an important program that she supported. Unfortunately, we lost Kelly Cobble. She died unexpectedly on March 12. So I'm going to ask for a moment of silence in honor of her contributions to society. And I thank you. Now for John Quincy Adams. When one thinks of John Quincy Adams, who served as our 6th president from 1825 to 1829, first father and son Adams presidents, we recognize he is not noted for his presidency alone. It is what he accomplished before as a young diplomat and his contributions beyond that of his first term as president that influenced our democracy, putting values into practice. Diplomacy and democracy for him started at a very young age, at the age of 14. Adams first visited Russia in 1781 as a French language interpreter for the U.S. envoy Francis Dana. In noting John Quincy Adams' serving as a diplomat at a very young and early age, I was interested to read a recent Boston Globe editorial that noted today's senators, representatives, members of Congress, and diplomats rely on their staff, who are charged with research, decision-making, drafting of legislation, hearing preparation, and effecting change in a very fast-paced society. History continues to repeat itself, and perhaps not at the age of 12 or 14 as John Quincy. However, they're young nonetheless. John Quincy Adams served in St. Petersburg during Napoleon's invasion of Russia. He befriended the Tsar Alexander I, provided books of Russian grammar and vocabulary as the beginning of Russian studies in the United States. And while his father, John Adams, was president, John Quincy Adams traveled throughout Europe, where he met and married our first foreign-born First Lady, Louisa Catherine Adams. She was born in England of French descent. Her valiant rendezvous with John Quincy Adams brought her some 2,000 miles from Russia to France, traveling by carriage, traveling alone across a war-torn Europe, while John Quincy Adams was negotiating an end to the War of 1812 in Ghent. A diplomat, once again influencing democracy. Louisa's journey is captured in a written account from Russia with Love, and I recommend it to you as a good summer read. She was a very brave soul. You see, serving as ambassador in Russia in St. Petersburg had its many challenges, the most heartbreaking of which was experiencing the loss of their 2-year-old daughter, who was buried in St. Petersburg. And while negotiating peace with the Tsar Alexander I, their mission was not accomplished because the Tsar died unexpectedly. John Quincy Adams was unable to attend that funeral, and of note, the Adams collection includes a massive hand-painted drawing of the cortege of the Tsar's burial. It's an extraordinary work of art. In addition, John Quincy Adams became a gifted linguist. He became minister to the Netherlands, to Portugal, a member of the U.S. Senate, minister to Russia, minister to England, served as Secretary of State for President Monroe. John Quincy Adams was a diplomat in the administrations of George Washington, John Adams, and James Madison. He served in the Massachusetts Senate and the United States Senate, and he taught at Harvard University. Our only president to return to the House of Representatives, where he served 9 terms after serving as president. There he was a diplomat extraordinaire. People mattered. His community, his constituents insisted that he return to the House. They wanted and needed him there to represent them. He was trusted. While there, he was called upon to represent the Mende tribe, to defend and represent them, to gain their freedom when they were being held captive on the Amistad. They were going to be sold as slaves. And oh, how John Quincy Adams feared he would not be effective or successful in defending them. But he was wrong. He took the challenge, and he succeeded. He gained their freedom. His peers, as Mayor Koch mentioned, called him old man eloquent. They trusted him, they believed in him, they listened and they learned from him, and they knew John Quincy would best represent them as he did the Mende tribe. In the Adams collection, we have the Mende Bible, along with a handwritten letter from St. Kay, a gift from the Mende people when they were freed to return to their home in Sierra Leone. The letter reads, and it's lengthy, but I'll just say the script is, "Thank you, kind sir, for gaining our freedom." This incident occurred in 1841. John Quincy Adams was 74 years old, and in 2022, the Adams National Historical Park looks forward to welcoming the president of Sierra Leone, a descendant of St. Kay, who plans to visit the United States and the Adams National Historical Park in the fall. Steven Spielberg produced the movie Amistad, telling this remarkable story of John Quincy Adams, diplomat, president, representative, lawyer, defender, and abolitionist, making a difference. It is no surprise that Pulitzer Prize winner David McCullough has expressed more than once that John Quincy Adams is our most brilliant of presidents. He had a remarkable influence as a diplomat, promoting our country's independence and growth. He signed treaties, he drafted the Monroe Doctrine, expansion of our transportation systems, building of bridges and canals, understanding development of our new country's infrastructure was critical and foremost to prepare for the future. He was fortuitous to know our country needed to grow and required expansion of its infrastructure. And today, we are now charged with rebuilding those bridges, those transportation systems, canals, and even the Sumner Tunnel. His love of science and idea to draft legislation as he was leaving the presidency to create what is now known as the Smithsonian Institution was a critical contribution to society and education today. He was fascinated by the stars, science, and celestial and terrestrial atmospheres. He planted trees for future generations. He valued the environment and understood our vast landscape and world in which we lived, and was a responsible steward for sustainability. He was a serious diplomat, a person who advocated for goodwill, anti-slavery advocacy, and throughout his career he advanced universal freedom and rights for all. Adams National Historic Site, on exhibit in the Stone Library, the desk he sat at when he was in the House of Representatives and he became ill. He had a stroke, and 2 days later he died. He died making decisions for his constituents. He died doing the right thing right. He suffered the loss of his parents, and when he returned to John Adams's Peacefield to serve his later years, his thousands of books were comforting to him and a reflection of not only his accomplishments, but the growth and development of our country in defining its governance. How did he define democracy as a diplomat? Well, I have the resource within the Stone Library, and I picked up a dictionary dated back in 1846 that was inscribed by the author as a gift to John Quincy Adams. And that dictionary, I'll tell you, defines democracy as a form of government in which the sovereign power is lodged in the body of the people, a republic. That's how he defined it. While our 21st century Google says it's the power that's invested in the people. So, from two different spectrums in time, we have the same meaning. So John Quincy Adams's democracy today would include and emphasize the opportunity to continue, you and me, having a voice while being represented, and knowing that you can't have democracy without trust. You can't have democracy without diversity, equality, inclusivity, or accessibility. To strengthen our democracy, to protect our America, we must work together, not harder, but smarter. JQA, John Quincy Adams, set the stage. Let us not disappoint. As superintendent for the National Park Service, I invite you all to visit Adams National Historical Park, the birthplace and home of President John Quincy Adams, whose birthday we're celebrating today. The grounds, gardens, orchard, and cultural landscape are a retreat, an atmosphere radiating beauty, tranquility, a bucolic place called Peacefield by John Adams. Why? It was so named for peaceful inspiration. It's open from dawn to dusk. Please walk with us. Thank you.
Now let me introduce Dr. Edward Fitzgerald from the Quincy Historical Society.
Thank you, Bill. On behalf of the Historical Society, I want to express, first of all, our honor in being able to participate in this commemoration of John Quincy Adams. I also, on behalf of the Historical Society, would just want to take a moment to thank Superintendent Peak and to join her on behalf of the Historical Society in remembering and honoring the memory of Kelly Cobb. Thank you. Mr. Westland has not assigned us an easy topic, so probably glad you were not my social studies teacher in high school. John Quincy Adams and democracy and governance, and I think you also mentioned the notion of respect in governance. Could keep us here for the rest of the day, but I am going to try and not do that, so we will try and keep it brief. John Quincy Adams was a complicated man. He lived in complicated times. He served for a very long time through several stages of our history. The thing I think that we need to remember about him is caught by the great historian Samuel Eliot Morison, who said, Adams' perception was abnormally keen. He alone of contemporaries in either hemisphere foresaw America's future place in the world. That basic notion that Adams was penetrating, that he saw deeply into things, that he saw maybe more than many others of his contemporaries did, has been reiterated since 1965 when Morison first saw it. Like most of his generation and like most of the founding generation, he had a ability to voice a skepticism, at least about direct democracy. This we know as part of the basics of our government. There are limits in our Constitution that the founders put in to limit the direct participation. We have the Electoral College. Up until 1912, we had senators chosen by state legislators rather than direct votes. And certainly early in his career, some of that can be heard in John Quincy Adams too. Not an opposition, but a skepticism about democracy. But he had a strong commitment to representative government, as Superintendent Peake was just demonstrating to us. And throughout his career, there are three sort of key documents in which he is trying to create a vision or articulate a vision of what representative democracy and it really entails, and also to create a sense of what the United States is. Part of this is the point that we often forget, that this is early. It's not at all clear, particularly in the 1780s, the 1790s, the early 1800s, that the United States of America is going to continue to exist. So he wants not only a theoretical basis, but he wants a foundation to guarantee an ethic that will guarantee the continuation of the country. Three speeches of where he is commemorating historic events. The earliest is in 1802, when he addresses the gathering in Plymouth, the Founders' Day gathering to celebrate the arrival of the Pilgrims in Plymouth, in which he becomes the first person to articulate the notion of the Mayflower Compact as the origin and the initial point of self-government in the United States. Whether you continue to accept that as an accurate historical point, the theoretical point for Adams is important. The first half of Adams's career is consumed with international relations as ambassador and ultimately as Secretary of State. And his second most important statement about democracy occurs in 1821 in Washington, D.C., when he is Secretary of State, and he creates the link between Americans' government, American democracy, and its place in the world. Here he moves upward in time and for the first time begins to talk about the Declaration of Independence and what he claims is the revolutionary impact of this statement in the Declaration that, that sovereignty remains in the people. And he says of it, it was the first solemn declaration by a nation of the only legitimate foundation of civil government. It was the cornerstone of a new fabric, destined to cover the surface of the globe. It demolished at a stroke the lawfulness of all governments founded upon conquest. It swept away all the rubbish of accumulated centuries of servitude. It announced in practical form to the world the transcendent truth of the unalienable sovereignty of the people. And by extending it out, he sets what he sees as the ethical compass for America in the world. That America has to be strong, that it has to defend its freedoms and its priorities. But this is the speech in which he says, "We do not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy." He concludes, "Her glory, our glory, is not dominion, but liberty. Her march, our march, is the march of the mind. Liberty carries a spear and a shield, but the motto upon her shield is freedom, independence, and peace." And, excuse me for a second, I'm working from too many papers here. He had articulated this view of representative government, this view of human rights and democracy, that by the time he becomes president and gives his inaugural address, he becomes the first president in American history to describe our system of government as, quote, "a representative democracy." Also, if anybody doubts John Quincy Adams' devotion to popular democracy, I will just call to mind his remarks in his diary when, at the age of 63, he is elected to Congress, and at the age of 63, he wins his first election in his entire life. We hear bits and pieces of this, but I will take just a moment to read the entire quote. He's been talking about how he was in all these appointed positions and he was always being honored, and then when the presidency began to get a little rocky, everybody began to abandon him. So he's not so hot about appointed honors anymore. And he also mentions, as I think we all know, that his family wasn't exactly delighted that he was going back into government, partly because he was going back into government, but also because they thought it was a step down. But he said, "But this call upon me by the people of the district in which I reside to represent them in Congress has been spontaneous, and although counteracted by a double opposition, Federalist and Jacksonite, I have received nearly 3 votes in 4 throughout my district." So he's saying, I won 75% of the vote. "My election as President of the United States was not half so gratifying to my inmost soul. No election or appointment conferred upon me ever gave me so great pleasure." For respect, I think, as Mr. Adams pointed out, also in his presidency and in his first message to Congress, he did say, "If you disagree with me, we can talk." Twice, as we know, he crossed party lines to support what he thought was right. With President Jefferson, whom he did not like in the early 1800s. And again, in 1836, he supported, against his party, he supported President Jackson on an international issue. But we also know John Quincy Adams was a man of acerbity, a man of critical faculties, and a man of considerable temper. And as congressman, as he went on, and particularly as he became more and more concerned about the issue of slavery, he lost a little bit of that ability to be respectful. In his diary, he becomes quite pointed in his comments on the Southerners and on what he calls the Southern democracy. He becomes concerned about, again, as he was 20, 30 years earlier, about the future of the country in terms of its ability to survive in the world. He becomes increasingly convinced and concerned about the ability of the country to survive internally. Earlier than anybody else, perhaps, as Fred Kaplan has pointed out, he began to worry that the Union would come apart over the issue of slavery and began to be concerned about that. His most expansive statement of democracy is also his most direct and most eloquent attack on the slaveholding power as a threat to democracy, and of what we might call demagogic democracy and hypocritical democracy to be a threat to true democracy. He talks about slaveholders who talk about the rights of man while they continue to hold slaves. He talks about the gangrene of slavery. He can be quite pointed. But he reaches puddle of papers one more time. I apologize for that. He reaches his fullest articulation of what democracy means for him. Again, returning to the Declaration of Independence, making the Declaration of Independence that document that predates the Constitution, that underlies the Constitution. Part of his argument here is that the Union predates the Constitution, that the Union resides in the Declaration of Independence, and that, therefore, the founding principles of the Declaration are really the guiding principles of the country. As he says, in setting forth the justifying causes of their separation from Great Britain, your fathers opened the fountains of the great deep. For the first time since the creation of the world, the act which constituted a great people, laid the foundation of their government upon the unalterable and eternal principles of human rights. And then, of course, he goes on to quote the famous passage about, we hold these truths to be self-evident. In the same speech, he says, the consent of the governed is the only legitimate source of authority to man over man. However, he also issues this warning as he looks at the ability of people using the mechanics of democracy to avoid the business of democracy by avoiding to discuss the substance of issues. The free and unrestrained discussion of the rights and wrongs of slavery, far from endangering the union of these states, is the only condition upon which that union can be preserved and perpetuated. And this line, which is in some ways almost, actually quite chilling, freedom of speech is the only safety valve which, under the high pressure of slavery, can preserve your political order from a fearful and fatal explosion. So he argued respect, but he also argued frankness and seriousness in our discussions. And the gag rule, the attempts to avoid the issue, remained his crusade for the remainder of his life. William Lee Miller, in his book about John Quincy Adams and the debates over slavery, mentions that when Adams died, many of the Southern opponents who had been tried to censure him twice and failed, turned up and were saying very kind words over them. And he said John Quincy Adams would have turned in his grave if he had been able to hear those things. So today, as we honor John Quincy Adams and his grave with the wreath from the president, let us also honor the honesty of his vision and the honesty of his words. Thank you.
And now Senator John Keenan, Senator from the Massachusetts Legislature.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is truly an honor to be here. Over the years, I have visited this great church and these hallowed grounds many, many times. And I am awed, have been awed every time that I have been here. But I have to tell you, to be here now, and for the first time in my life, speaking in this great place is about as humbling as experience as it can be, especially when we stand here in front of the giants of our democracy. We certainly live in interesting times in this great country, and here in Massachusetts as well. We are hopefully coming out of a pandemic, and we struggle with how to best handle the response as we go forward. Masks, no masks, vaccinations or treatments. All of those things continue to engage us in our public debate. And on the birthday of John Quincy Adams, we may wonder how might he have responded to such a crisis, given the complexities of this modern world. But beyond the issues of vaccines and masks, there is every bit as important a question that we in elective office must decide for ourselves and for those we serve. And it's clear where John Adams would stand, how John Adams would respond. In these challenging times, we ask the question, how will government govern? In the Massachusetts legislature, bills have passed in both the House of Representatives, and I'm glad to be joined here by my colleague in the House of Representatives, Representative Bruce Ayers. Bills have passed in the House of Representatives and the Senate that extend some of the COVID accommodations that were made during the pandemic, and as they relate specifically to how government will govern. There will likely be, once a bill is passed, an extension of the ability for both elected and appointed local government officials to participate in the governmental process remotely. That is, from home. In the Massachusetts Senate, we continue to operate in this manner as well, and there is a chance that we will operate in the same manner as we close out this legislative session and enter into our next two-year legislative session. I firmly believe that government works best when there are personal interactions between elected representatives. Often, as I consider issues that come before me in the Massachusetts State Senate, I call on these two gentlemen and their wives as I consider them. Recently, we have considered legislation that has to do with due process and right to counsel. And what better guidance for an elected representative in these days than the guidance of Quincy's presidents. Not surprisingly, having read for the first time John Quincy Adams' 1825 inaugural address, I again find wisdom that has survived the ages and should serve to lead us through these difficult times. Indeed, it is as important as ever that as elected representatives, we do meet in person as frequently as possible, as John Quincy Adams guides us, so that we may wear away the prejudices everywhere too commonly entertained against distant strangers, and allay the jealousness of jarring interest, so that we might learn to estimate the talents and do justice to the virtues of each other, so that we might knit together by the sentiments of mutual respect, the habits of social intercourse, and the ties of personal friendship, so that together we can best serve those who we represent. John Adams said those words during his inaugural in 1825. And we find ourselves, so many years later, in times of crisis, much like the times during which he served. I think the best course for us, as a people and as a nation, is to heed the words of John Quincy Adams. Happy birthday, John Quincy Adams, and thank you for the gift of eternal wisdom.
Now we'll have the laying of the Presidential Wreath. Lieutenant Commander Hidden.
On behalf of President Joe Biden, I present this wreath on President Adams' 255th birthday. We will now place the wreath on the tomb of President John Quincy Adams. Please remain seated until the presentation is complete, where we will return to retire the colors.
Spirit of life and love, thank you for the life of this great man, this diplomat and President John Quincy Adams. May your memory continue to be a blessing as we together work to bless the world. Amen. And happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
I want to thank everybody for being here today. And when this church was built, 1828, and Charles Francis Adams said that all the windows could be open, and there were windows behind us, not doors. There was nothing around us, And so therefore, there was always a cool breeze. Well, now some of the windows don't open, and of course we have doors behind us, there's building around us, so I know it does get hot in here. So thank you very much. And I especially want to thank the Quincy Choral Society. And I know it's hotter up there than it is down here. And the last 3 years, because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to have them. And it's great to have them back again. Maybe this is a sign that things are getting back to normal. Let's hope so anyway. And I apologize too, because in past years we've also had a reception. And once again, we're sort of gradually getting back to the way it used to be. So this year we didn't have one. Hopefully in October, for John Adams, we'll be able to have the reception and once again have the birthday cake. And everybody can sing happy birthday to John Adams. So keep your fingers crossed. And I thought you've heard an awful lot today about John Quincy Adams and democracy and so forth. So I thought I would just finish up and what other people thought about John Quincy Adams. And the Martin Van Buren, who was our 8th president, and he was a real bitter political foe of John Quincy Adams, but he still commented, Mr. Adams was an honest man, not only incorruptible himself, but an enemy, venality in every department of public service. He loved his country, desired to serve it usefully, and was properly ambitious of the honor of doing so, which is pretty high praise for a political opponent. And then finally, when the funeral services were held here for John Quincy Adams, and this is what the minister back then, William Parsons Lunt, said, we should review his long, useful, and illustrious life, recount the principal incidents of his career, and draw from his well-known character lessons that may be edifying. Where in history can you find such a glorious destiny assigned to a single life? So I don't think there's any doubt that John Quincy Adams was really one of our most important church members, as well as being a most important American. And we certainly could learn an awful lot from him today. And just to sum up, I think John Quincy Adams, this is what he said: always vote for principle. Though you may vote alone, you may cherish the reflection that your vote is never lost. And I think we should keep that in mind as time goes by. And now I'm going to have Reverend Rebecca Froome, I won't neglect you again, do the benediction. Thank you.
Let's return for a moment to that shared breath, that shared heartbeat. Spirit of life, Spirit of love, God of justice, God of mercy. We give thanks for this time spent together this afternoon, this opportunity to deepen our understanding of the life, the writings, the work, the legacy of John Quincy Adams. Inspired by the words we have heard today, inspired by his actions centuries ago, may we go forth, dedicated to live our lives with integrity, to live our lives with respect, to live our lives with honesty, so that we might bring the spirit and the practice of democracy into our communities, so that indeed the progressive improvement of the condition of the governed might prevail. May it be so. Amen.
And now, Lieutenant Commander Payne will now actually retire the colors.
Retire the colors.